Christy, thanks so much for being on the Compared To show today.
Thanks for having me. It's really a joy to be with you.
Well, you have a great story, and I'm excited for you to share it with our listeners and our viewers today. But I love the fact that you're in this work now. I mean, this is
Yeah.
what you live and breathe. Did you ever think this is what you'd be doing? Working on eating disorder stuff all the time?
I mean, certainly not when I was struggling because I didn't even know that I was struggling at the time. So I would have been real confused. Like, why am I
Yeah.
doing that with my life?
Yeah.
But no, and even when I started recovery, in a way, I wanted just to get my little check the box and move on with my life. I think
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, my mindset was do the thing, get better, and then never think about it ever again. And
Yeah.
instead, all I do is talk to strangers about it on airplanes and at dinner parties all the time now. So it's a real redirection, I think. Where
I
I am.
love it. I love it. Okay, well let's start at the beginning.
Absolutely.
How'd you get here?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I joke a lot about the Holy Spirit and the internet getting me to most things in life.
Uh,
And I feel like somehow Rock Recovery is no different. So,
yeah.
yeah, so I've been on staff at Rock Recovery now for a little over 10 years. I got a lovely sabbatical over the summer. So I like to think I'm
Wonderful.
a little more serene and wise, although I don't think that will last for long. But yeah, it's been lovely. And then I struggled with an eating disorder early on in life from about age 13 to 23. And
Okay.
I turn 40 this month. So
Okay.
you can do the math if you want to do the math on how long I've been recovered, but the
Yeah.
numbers keep changing as time goes on, right? Now it's been
Yeah.
almost half my life, which is wild because for a long
Oh.
time I had struggled for over half my life, but it's
Mhm.
cool to now be like, wow, I've almost been recovered for over half my life.
Yeah.
That's kind of neat. So
That's awesome. Now, did you know you had an eating disorder? Were you in treatment or what did that look like?
eventually, I was sort of tricked into treatment, which I
Mhm.
think is many people's stories. So for a long time, right, my story started as one with diet culture's little fingerprints all
Mhm.
over it, right? So a lot of my disordered eating earlier on in my life, I'd say my disordered eating turned more eating disorder at 13, but my
Okay.
first diet was when I was 8.
Wow.
So, there were some things along the way that started to change my relationship to food and my body and what I believed about
Mhm.
myself and what I believed made me worthy or safe or healthy, quote unquote, or good.
Yeah.
And all that stuff started pretty young. But I would say my eating disorder got deeper in college. So,
Mhm.
late teens, early 20s, that was when things got pretty bad. But I didn't know I had an eating disorder because everyone around me did pretty disordered stuff. I mean, I
Mhm.
was used to being around people who hated their bodies, who made comments, who did some pretty restrictive or pretty
Mhm.
strange, looking back on it, food rituals or
Mhm.
food behaviors, right? That when everyone else was doing it, I didn't realize that something was wrong. But then
Yeah.
once I kind of got healthy and realized, oh, that's not freedom, that's not wellness, that's not good.
Mhm.
Um, that's kind of when things changed for me. So I think I knew I didn't like my body, and maybe I might even say I hated my body at
Mhm.
various phases, which makes me so sad to say looking back. But I
Mhm.
did, right? I was constantly at war with my body, and either depending on the year or the day, it was like food was either my mortal enemy or my only friend, right? So
Mhm.
I also had this like vacillating relationship with food, and I struggled with kind of all kinds of different behaviors on the spectrum of disordered eating. So that ebbed and flowed for me over the years, but the one thing that never changed was just the hatred of my body,
Mhm.
the fear around food in a lot of ways, and the desire to be good and the desire to be
Mhm.
wanted and safe and in control and all those things that food sort of helped me feel at various times.
Mhm. Yeah. So what happened?
Well, I mean, after living for a pretty long time of food rules and calorie counting and weight checking and all the things,
Mhm.
I graduated college. I went to school in Raleigh. So I moved from Texas. I grew up in Texas against my will.
Wait,
I
where did you
know,
grow up in Texas?
South Lake outside of
Okay.
Dallas.
Uh-huh. I know
Yeah,
South
you
Lake.
know
Yep.
it. Yeah, go
Yep.
Dragons. And when I was 8, we moved. I remember my parents, we always talk about this in my family now. Like, my parents sat me down with my sister and they're like, we're having a family meeting. And we were like, oh, I bet we're finally getting a puppy or going to
Uh-huh.
Disney World. And they're like, oh, we're moving to Texas. And my sister and I are like, without a puppy? Like, wait, Texas? Like, why would we go to Texas? We're in Pennsylvania. That's really far away. Do they have cacti there? Like, what do you do in
That's
Texas?
so
And so yeah, ever since we moved there, I was real angry about it, and that's actually a lot of when my disordered eating started was, I
huh.
think, to cope with the loss and the change
Yeah.
and to feel in control or to feel comfort, right? I didn't have any words for that as an 8-year-old or even as a
Mm,
23-year-old later in life. But
yeah.
yeah, I just kind of knew that something wasn't quite right. But so yeah, we moved to there. And then when I went to college, I wanted out of Texas because I
Mm,
was still mad that I was brought there. And so
mm.
I went to North Carolina State and went there.
Interesting. Well, but
Mhm.
I'm like, I didn't know that part of your story. And having
Yeah.
lived in the Dallas area, so I'm in Austin now, but I lived in the Metroplex for 10 years.
Mhm.
And I like the eating disorder, body image stuff as it relates. I mean, it's everywhere, right? Women
Sure.
everywhere struggle, but there is a different kind of special pressure in the DFW area. I mean, it is LA like for
It
sure.
with more blondes and bigger hair. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it really is true. Like it's funny how there's like sometimes stereotypes for a reason. You're like, yeah, there are a lot of
Yeah.
blondes. I am a natural blonde, I will say. I don't highlight or color my hair. I use sun in like an 8th grade girl still, which has not gotten me too orange yet. It saves me a lot of money every year, but I'm
That's
like, okay.
awesome.
But yeah, I know there are a lot of blondes in Texas.
Yep.
Um, but there is this appearance driven world, right?
Mhm.
Even to your point, even more than it's everywhere, but
Yeah.
it's like on extra volume a
Yeah.
few places. And I think Dallas is one of those
Well,
places.
the number one graduation gift in the Metroplex, I haven't looked at the stat in a number of years, but
Mm.
7 or 8 years ago, for a couple years straight, the number one high school graduation gift for girls was boob job in the DFW area.
That I, I am
So,
actually shocked.
yeah,
That
so
is
like that's the level of importance. Like, this is your top priority going to college is to get this done.
oh
And again, no shame or
wow.
condemnation if
Yeah,
anyone
sure.
listening or
No.
watching has gotten it done, but just thinking about like how elevated that is.
Yeah. I wanted cold hard
Scary.
cash at 18, but I guess it wasn't an option to get like any other kind of surgery. I
Right.
mean, I wonder if I would have had an option, what would I have wanted, right? Like if
Right.
it, wow,
Yeah.
because that was 2002 when I graduated. So a
Yeah.
little longer ago.
Yeah.
That that's just that is heartbreaking though, right? Like we value changing our appearance and kind of reinventing ourselves, right? In so many
That's
ways.
exactly
So
it.
that timing is just it makes so much sense in the world and it's so heartbreaking because
Yeah.
it's not what we need to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, gosh.
Okay. Sorry. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Go on with your story. So,
I have so many thoughts and feelings. Oh my gosh, Heather, what do we do? So yeah, so I mean, again, I feel like I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, and we don't, need to go too into the muck and the mire of all of the things. I think we all know what it's like to struggle in various
mhm,
ways, and it's just not good. But when I graduated college, looking back, transition, right, is a time where
mhm,
disordered behaviors often ramp up. So for
mhm,
me, it makes sense that when we moved, when I was 8, it started. When I moved to college from
mhm,
Texas, it initially ramped up a lot. When I
mhm.
graduated college and I moved from Raleigh to Charlotte, it ramped
Okay.
up again, right?
Mhm,
So there's looking back, if I look at it like a timeline, I'm like, wow, this actually makes a lot of sense. Like at
mhm.
least at least there's some logic to what happened
Yeah.
and my struggle and things like it. I didn't have coping skills. I didn't know how to make sense of things. I didn't know how to feel worthy. I didn't
Mhm.
know how to feel safe. And I had all these patterns that I'd built and sort of got stuck in these ruts
Yeah.
and routines. And here we are, right? And then,
Yeah.
the more we learn, we have a wonderful therapist here at Rock Recovery who's taught me even more about the binge and restrict cycle that we're learning
Mhm,
about, right? Scientifically, it's like, yes, restrictions at the root of almost any kind of binge that we
mhm,
experience. And so I think for me, for all those years, if I wanted to be on a diet or couldn't keep a diet or couldn't keep a thing, I was the problem. What's
mhm.
wrong with me? Why don't I have willpower? What I'm a failure. And
Yeah.
the more I've learned over the years, even post recovery, it's like, oh, I'm not the problem. And I wasn't the
Mhm.
problem. My body was trying to help. And
Yeah.
the behaviors were the problem and
Mhm.
just the information I was getting. I grew up on Self Magazine and Fitness
Uh-huh.
Magazine and all that
Yep.
stuff, right?
Shape
Like
magazine.
Shape
Yep.
Magazine. Oh gosh, why? And I could tell you the calories in any food, but I
Mhm.
couldn't tell you if it had vitamin C in it. Like it's just
Right.
wild the things
Yeah.
I knew. Like it's just wild. It's
Yeah.
wild looking back what we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I I didn't realize that I was sick. I didn't realize that I was
Mhm.
even necessary. I think I knew I had a bad relationship with food in my body. If you would
Mhm.
have really asked me, I would have been like, other people seem happier than me. I don't
Mhm.
know why. That's all I know. But I think once I graduated college, a friend of mine passed away from cancer, which
Mm.
just like totally rocked my
Oh,
world
yeah.
because
Sorry.
thank you. I know it
Yeah.
wasn't on my radar. Like we were 22, right? Like it
Mhm.
just So that made me and my anxiety really ramp up in addition to the move and graduating college. I had a job that I hated. I was a ballerina growing up and I took a job at a
Okay.
sports PR firm. I'm like,
Okay.
my most embarrassing moment was when I was pitching like a really fancy sports person and talked about, and I should know it's from Texas, Heather, but called the gridiron the gridiron. I didn't know. I just never heard the term gridiron before. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh yeah, the gridiron. And he's like, you mean gridiron, sweetie? And I'm like, oh, sure. Sure, that's what I meant. So I just was having a lot of identity problems, I think. I was in
Yeah.
this job that didn't fit. I was in this world I didn't understand. I
Yeah.
wasn't a person of faith yet. So I just didn't have a worldview that really kind of clicked things together. And of course, we can
Mhm.
be people of faith and still struggle all day
Mhm.
long with a million
Sure.
things, right? But for
Yeah.
me, what changed everything, like 7 hours later, I'll answer your question. What changed things for me was actually I met this really lovely man out
Mhm.
at a bar, believe it or not. I
Mhm.
know. I know. So after college, I didn't do a lot besides run and go to bars on the weekend, and happened to be at this ugly sweater party in
Uh-huh.
Charlotte, North Carolina for Christmas, and met this nice guy who's like, "What do you do on the weekends?" And I'm like, "You're looking at it." And he's like, "Do you want to go to church?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"Sure, why not?" It sounds I think I was desperate enough to know I needed a different way. And
Yeah.
he was also pretty cute. So I
Uh-huh.
think that kind of helped a little bit. So
The power of a cute boy. Yes.
who is now to this day, 20 years later, a dear friend of mine. His
Uh-huh.
wife is like, was one of my bridesmaids when we got
Awesome.
married,
Yeah.
so like the Lord does redeem. And this lovely man and I were only ever friends, but it got me to church and it got me
Yeah.
into recovery in a way. So
Wow.
he invited me to this lovely church. It was a new plant from London. The
Okay.
people had cool accents, which was, intriguing enough.
Mhm.
And their slogan was a church for people who don't go to church.
Okay.
And, growing up in the South, I had a little bit of burn from some of the super intense things that I was around. I think I was raised quasi-Catholic, but didn't really connect to it. And then I
Okay.
felt like I got a lot of other mixed messages about things that people who shouted the loudest often about their
Mhm.
Christianity were often the meanest. And I just
Mhm.
struggled with that to like
Mhm.
make sense of what that meant, right?
Yeah.
We're all human as it turns out, but I think faith was not really interesting to me.
Mhm.
And then suddenly when life got hard and I found this church of people who seemed real and
Mm.
authentic and interesting and, cute in some cases, I was like, well, this
Mhm.
place seems worth coming back to.
Yeah.
And the very first week I was there, a woman got up and made an announcement about this course she was running. And she's like, I had an eating disorder. I'm recovered. There's this thing
Mhm.
I'm running called New ID. It's 6 weeks. If you want to come talk to me after the service and you can sign up. It was like $20 or something super affordable.
Okay.
And at my very meager PR coordinator rate I was making at the time, I needed something more affordable. So,
Mhm.
so I talked to her and I was like, 6 weeks, that sounds so long, but I guess I can go. And I am like, I don't think I have an eating disorder, but I have this weird food stuff. So
Mm.
she seems nice. I'll just try.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I went to the first night of that course, and I remember thinking an expletive in my head and being like, wait, I check all these boxes as she was
Mhm.
going through, like, here are some signs to look for if you have an eating disorder. And I was like,
Yeah.
hold up, I check all those boxes, but no
Yeah.
one's told me I have an eating disorder, right? Like, it just didn't make sense to
Mhm.
me. But suddenly, the scales fell off my eyes and I realized that's what this has been. That's what this is.
Mm.
Like there's a name for this and it's not I don't have to look a certain way. I had the own stigma in my head, right? Like, oh, you knew people with anorexia in high
Right.
school. I didn't look like that. I didn't act like that. I don't have an eating disorder, right? Like
Yeah.
so, yeah, that was life-changing for me. Life-changing
Wow.
for me.
Wow, did you resist at first?
No, I think which is so funny because my very first sentence as a child was not the boss of me. So you would think, well, my mom loves telling that story. It's like some things never change. And God and I have a good wrestle over that one sometimes, I feel like, right? But
Love it.
I'm normally kind of hard to convince. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't like changing my mind. I don't like changing my ways. But I think by that point, the phrase like you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. I
Mhm.
think, I think I just knew something wasn't working and I had
Mhm.
tried all the things for so long.
Yeah.
And I think just like the grace, I don't know, something for whatever reason, my ears were opened. Then
Mhm.
maybe, they hadn't been for years and years earlier. I'm often sad that I
Mm.
struggled for so long, but for whatever reason, my heart shifted pretty fast and
Mm.
I was in. And that night, I remember I went home after that first night of New ID And I've been journaling since I was 8 years old, which
Mhm.
like my handwriting hasn't gotten any better, sadly. And it's only gotten worse. I really peaked at 8, I guess, with my handwriting. And but I was able like to read through. But I remember coming home that night and just reading through all my journals. And my roommate at the time came home and she like poked her head in and she's like, "Hey, honey, um, what are you doing?" And I was
Mm,
like, "Well, Nancy, like I went to this course. I have an eating disorder. I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong. So then I know how to
mhm,
fix it as fast as I
mhm.
humanly can. And I can just like move on with my life." And she's like, "Did they happen to give you like a referral for a therapist or like maybe anyone you could call?" Right. And so
Uh-huh.
they did, thankfully. And I called her the next day and it was great. But I just for me, I think I was like, okay, I'm all in. Like for whatever
Mhm.
reason, I was suddenly all in on recovery. So
Yeah.
and even if I had any hesitation or any ambivalence, the next day I had just started getting a scripture a day emailed to me.
Okay.
And the next day, I opened my little inbox, and the scripture we go over the first week of New ID, which Rock Recovery now runs, by the way, virtually quarterly. I get to run that now. But the very first scripture, it's Romans, Paul talking about, "I don't know why I do what I do. For what I
Mhm,
want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. For I have the
mhm,
desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out." And like, man, doesn't that, we don't think mental illness is a sin by any means or
mhm.
anything, but that behavior of just the habituation being stuck.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep doing this. Why do I keep doing
Mhm,
this? Right, that really resonates. And so the very next day, that was the scripture that was emailed to me.
mhm,
And I'd never read the Bible really before.
mhm.
So I was new to the Bible. I couldn't even point to the New Testament, honestly, let alone like
Uh-huh.
Romans. So it just really shook me. I remember just
Yeah.
sobbing when I got that email because I was like, oh my gosh, God, you're real. Like,
Mm,
you're real. Like, I
yeah.
wasn't sure yet. I wasn't sure, but I did know that that Bible's a big book. And
Mhm.
it seems super coincidental that like the passage I read 12 hours earlier was suddenly in my inbox, right? Like just the
Yeah.
very next day. So
Yeah.
I think that was enough to make me like all in for sure. Like just
Wow.
all in all the way. Yeah.
Wow. And what happened next?
So many things. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's keep going. So what happened next? I did call that therapist. Her name is
Mhm.
Melissa. She's wonderful, very helpful. Um, I always talk about sort of the 3 things that got me better as being experts, people with
Okay.
fancy letters behind their names. What a good time they are. I joke, I'm sadly not a therapist, but I hang out with them all day long, which
Uh-huh.
is like a pretty good gig.
Mhm.
And I have a personal story and experience, which also, of course, has amazing experience and a lot to offer the world. So I'm pleased by that. But for me, the clinical support was just critical. And then the second piece is kind of community. So peers, mentors, people who get it, support systems, family, friends, whatever. And then, faith, just that idea of for me, for rock recovery, we talk a lot about, building your recovery on the rock. And
Mhm.
so whatever that looks like for somebody, but for me, since my conversion and my recovery sort of happened in one jumbly mess,
Mhm.
I can't separate one from the other, which is good and
Mhm.
bad, I think, in various ways. It's my story and it was beautiful. And, it
Yeah.
involved a lot of surrender. I think that there was a lot of surrendering happening and a lot of taking back and a lot of surrendering again and a lot of taking back. But that just belief that God had something more for me and
Mm.
created my body and cared about my body and yet
Mm.
loved me even if I fell short was
Yeah.
hugely restorative and just redemptive for me and healing for me. And so I started to kind of dig into all those things, right? I worked with this therapist. I finished the new ID course. I started telling people, safe people in my life, what was going on
Mhm.
and got, some bumbly responses here and there. But
Yeah.
surprisingly enough, like everyone tried, right? Like everyone wanted to
Mhm.
care for me. Everyone did their best.
Yeah.
My parents were super supportive. I had a sister who had an eating disorder as well in high school. So I think it
Okay.
was a lot for them to be like, oh, wait, both our daughters had eating
Mm.
disorders. Like, where did we go wrong?
Mhm.
And, now we know I was a ballerina. So was my sister. There were a lot of diet culture things,
Mhm.
genetics, of course, we know more about that now. So it's not by any means my parents' fault at all. But
Mm.
I think there was some complication there a little bit. And they were so supportive. At
Mm.
first, they didn't really know what to say necessarily,
Mm.
but they paid for my treatment. They were
Okay.
able to help support my therapy costs. They were
Yeah.
able to do that kind of work. And they supported me the best they could. My friends, similarly, a lot of them had their own stuff with food and
Mhm.
body image, but some people I knew, I'm not going to eat with them. We'll just go on walks or get coffee. And some people,
Yeah.
so I drew some boundaries and figured out who my safe people were, who I wanted to spend more time with, and walked through that process of recovery. I remember It involved a lot of eating muffins, oddly enough for me, like kind of going through the foods that I
Hmm.
feared and
Uh-huh.
the foods that I judged. And turns out muffins are great. I don't know why I
Yeah.
judged them so bad. Muffins are
They were
great.
totally demonized though. You're right.
They are. We
Yeah.
have this, I wish I had the sign in here. We have a sign that says cupcakes are just muffins that believed in miracles in our
Uh-huh. Yeah.
office here. So,
There's one of those in the Magnolia, the Chip and Joanna Gaines, the Magnolia Bakery. They have that sign there too.
oh, well, I'm glad we
Yeah.
have similar tastes. Maybe we'll be friends one day. That's good to hear. Yeah, so but turns out cupcakes and
Uh,
muffins are great. So I
yeah.
just a lot of recovery was practical stuff like that, right? Learning
Mhm.
how to eat, learning how to remove food rules, the intuitive eating stuff,
Yeah.
trusting my body, removing beliefs about behavior or how I had to look or not look. And it was messy and frustrating. And I remember sitting with my therapist, like crying, being like, babies are better at eating than I am. Like,
Mm,
that's so frustrating that like
mhm.
but she's like, "Yeah, but all these years you've learned false stuff, so you can't unlearn it overnight." And I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
that's real dumb. We should find out a way to be able to do that because this is very painful and frustrating
Yeah.
and super inefficient." But yeah, it was an up and down process for sure. But yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, once I was in, and so
Mhm.
there was no turning back. And I think I think of the psalm. I'm bad at the numbers, but better is one day in your courts than a
Mhm.
thousand elsewhere. And
Mhm.
I think about that as recovery. Better is like your worst day in recovery than your best
Mm.
day before
That's
it.
good.
Like, right? Like there's something
Yeah.
about that I was getting closer to truth and to light. And
Yeah.
that was good. Like that was
Yeah.
worth fighting for. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So did you come out with an actual like eating disorder diagnosis? Were you actually like atypical anorexic, or are you EDNOS? Well, they don't say EDNOS
Yeah.
anymore, but what
Yeah.
did you have a diagnosis, or were you kind of in that jumbled, like, we're not sure, but this was an eating disorder
I think
category?
I was Ed Now I'm like, I never asked for my therapist notes. I guess you can do that, right? I'm like, but no, I didn't ask for them my diagnosis. But we basically, I think, worked as though it was like OSFED EDNOS, right? Like the otherwise
Okay.
specified feeding eating disorder.
Yeah.
So, because it kind of was, and that's what made it
Mhm.
so hard for me to spot was I certainly
Right.
had behaviors that were like very clearly defined within the DSM,
Mhm.
and sometimes frequency wasn't quite right. There are all those
Mhm.
ways you can kind of skirt around
Right.
diagnoses. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And I
yeah,
asked that just because I think a lot of, I won't generalize, but I know
sure.
that there are some listeners that have, like me, like well, I'm not anorexic. I'm not able to throw up. I'm not bulimic. And like they grew up
Mhm.
with only those two categories,
Yep.
and seriously doubt that they could actually have an eating disorder.
Yep.
And that's a big hurdle to just even face that or call it that,
Yeah.
right?
And even still, like it's funny. It's sort of like I'm like, does eighth grade ever really end in our hearts? Like the comparison, or like the even not that you need to be proud of a label, but it is sort of like, oh, I wish I did fit into a category because it
Mhm.
just feels neat. Like it's
Yeah.
like something in my brain wants to be able to judge. Like it
Mhm.
wants to feel
Mhm.
safe by being like, here's the category,
Yeah.
here's the thing, right? And it's
Yeah.
just,
Well, yeah, it's
yeah,
like you're not
yeah,
full blown,
right,
like, right, like you're not in the cool kids eating
right.
disorder or something like that.
Gosh,
Yeah, no, that's twisted thinking that I can totally
isn't
relate
it?
to.
I
Yeah, but
know.
because it feels like well, I've got a lesser eating disorder. What
Exactly,
is
right?
that?
And if it was lesser, we should be grateful. Like, it's like you don't
Right,
want them more. Like, and not again,
right.
there is no comparison. Like,
Yeah,
pain is pain. Things are,
right,
we
right.
don't have to categorize and judge them. But it's funny that the desire to do it is there. Yeah, it's an
Mhm.
interesting, and I don't know, maybe it's a
Yeah.
personality thing, but yeah, I feel that
Type
for
A
sure.
overachiever thing that goes with eating
What?
disorder stuff
You think that's
for
what we
sure.
are? Oh
Yeah.
no. Oh
Well, so,
no.
but like, how did your friends that were still engaged in disordered eating behaviors, like, what was the interaction with them like when you started eating muffins?
Gosh. I mean, thankfully, no one ever I mean, maybe someone said something to me at some point that maybe was stupid, but I don't remember anything at this time. But thankfully, I think people I think I learned the tools to shut it down if someone made a comment. Like if I could
Okay.
tell someone was going to say something or like, "Oh, why like you ordered this?" I think I kind of learned like, "Hey, like I'm in a vulnerable place and I'm not talking about what I'm eating or not eating and I'm not talking about what you're eating or not eating. I don't feel safe being in a place like I don't think it's healthy for me to be in a place where people are talking about weight loss or calories. Like, will you please just not talk about that stuff around me because I feel like it's
Mhm.
not good for me." Because it
Yeah.
can be easy to be like you shouldn't talk about those things. And then people feel defensive or judged or
Gotcha.
shame, right? But I think I just kind of learned, like my therapist really helped me be like, here's what you say. Like, and if people don't
Mhm.
listen, like walk away or
Mhm.
change the conversation, or especially,
Mhm.
if it's in a group dynamic or something. But I'm assertive enough that I never really had a huge problem
Uh-huh.
sort
Yeah.
of asking for what I needed.
Yeah.
And then I think with friends, I'm sure they notice, my body changed, like my weight did change,
Mhm.
especially at first. Eventually it sort of evened out a little bit over time, but that was hard. But the hard thing about that was, right, people often comment positively on weight loss and then
Mhm.
either negatively or just the crickets about
Mhm.
weight gain. So it was
Right.
almost like what wasn't said,
Right.
honestly, than like what was said.
Right.
But I had to just remember, and this can sound so prideful, but I remember thinking and talking to my therapist about this, like, you just know better. Like, you really are more like, better than these people. Not that you're so
Mhm.
smart or so brilliant, but like, that this is freedom and that this is
Mhm.
health, and they are still believing a lie. And you
Yeah.
have to just, even if it's painful, even if it's hard to be out of norm and swim upstream and do all the things, like, you have to just be able to try to find peace in knowing,
Mhm.
like, this is what's true and I can cling to that and I can
Yeah.
try to like let go of the rest and, be the
Yeah.
change, however else. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. So then what was the journey like from recovery to now I work at Rock Recovery?
Yeah, and now it's literally my job and all I do all day long and talk about all day long. My husband and I always joke whenever I'm like come home mad about something or like this diet thing or this whatever thing. He's like, "Oh, honey, our news feeds are really different. I have no idea what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Everyone who's anyone is talking about
Uh,
it. Like, how do you not know?"
yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways,
That's
it's funny
hilarious.
how it's like now it's totally my world, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So it happened a couple different ways. So I was working at Habitat for Humanity in Charlotte. I loved it. Such a
Okay.
great organization. I left the sports PR firm after 8 months. It's all I could take of
Uh-huh.
mispronouncing sports words. I couldn't do it. And it was a great place to be working and I loved it. And it was great for me because I was there when I was getting healthy and healed.
Mhm.
So like, recovery took a while. It's hard to say. And this was the day I was fully free, but it took a couple years, right?
Yeah.
And for some people, it takes different lengths of time. And that's hard to know it won't take. I remember thinking when I signed up for a new ID that 6 weeks felt like an eternity. And then they're
Mhm.
like, oh, so by the end of 6 weeks, you aren't going to be better. And I was like,
Uh,
oh, well, that's a real bummer.
yeah.
But you
Yeah.
are better than when you started, right? That's again the
Yeah.
beauty is like each little day and round is somehow better, even though you're not necessarily arrived at the
Right.
destination in the journey. Um, but I think for me, it took a while. Body image was the last thing to sort of heal for me, as it often is for people. So
Mhm.
food stuff took a while, but once I kind of dropped the food rules, did intuitive eating, kind of got to a different place, it was still hard and countercultural, but I started to learn to trust my body. And that was
Mhm.
so different to be like, wow, I cannot work against this thing every second of every day. I can think, oh, I do want that cookie, or I actually don't. Like, I didn't
Mhm.
believe it'd be possible because it was always, I'm bad if I do this, or I'm good if I do
Yeah.
this, or, like, I didn't believe there was another way to look at food. Like
Yeah.
and then suddenly that went away and that was great. And it was slow, right? The calorie
Mhm.
counting took a while to let go of. A lot of the things were hard, but eventually I was feeling better and I was like, okay, well, I'm feeling better. I want to kind of help other people because now I know that there's all this freedom to be had and I didn't even know
Mhm.
I was sick and sure there's more people like me. So I started volunteering with New ID at the local church I was at. And then I realized I want to do more. Like I want to do more of this work. And I was very aware of the privilege that I have where, I didn't make much money, but my parents, they did. And so they were able, right, to like pay for things that other people didn't have access to. And there was one day, maybe 2 years after I graduated New ID, that I ran into this woman on the street that I had gone through the course with who I really liked. We weren't like super close, but I really liked her and I remembered
Mhm.
her. And I looked at her and I was like, and you could just tell she was exactly where she was two
Mhm.
years ago. Like no change in
Mhm.
her spirit, in her appearance. And you can't obviously tell from looking at somebody often what they're going through, but you can sense sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Like how
Yeah.
someone is doing.
Yeah.
And I could just tell that she was stuck and it kind of came out. We were starting to chat and like finances were a real barrier for her and
Mhm.
she didn't have the same access to resources that I had. And that broke my heart. And I was like, well, what if people don't have money to pay for therapy? What do those people do? So I started
Yeah.
researching and started Googling. And this is where the Holy Spirit and the internet, come back into play.
Mhm.
So I was like, what do people do? And apparently not a lot, because there's not much out there for people who can't afford treatment, who need it,
Yeah.
especially with a specialization in eating disorders. Some churches have funds and there are certainly some things here and there, but I came across Rock Recovery. This was in 2000 and I'm like 2010, I guess, that I found Rock Recovery. And I was like, this place looks interesting. The website was really ugly. I'm sorry, Carrie, our wonderful founder. You're so smart, but the website was so bad. And
Hey, that stuff's hard.
I know. And in her defense, we were a volunteer-run organization for many years, right? So like, fair enough. Yes. So fair enough. But I remember being like, okay, where's the contact button? And I found the
Okay.
contact button. And so I reached out and we got together. I was coming up to DC. I was living in North Carolina still. I was coming up to DC for a wedding. And I was like, do you want to
Okay.
meet and get together? And I met with her at Panera and fell in love with her and the mission. And just like we were holding hands and praying, probably freaking everyone else around us like totally out. Cause like it's DC. People don't really hold hands and pray in public a lot here. And so they were like, what are these chicks doing over here? And I just was like, wow, I just love her. And I love the vision. I love the mission. How can I help? So I started volunteering. And then I was like, maybe I should move to DC to get more involved. So I applied for 3 jobs, got 3 interviews, got 3 offers, which made me feel really good about myself because that very rarely happens. And I felt like confirmation again from the God that I
Yeah.
was just like being called to move to DC and get involved.
Yeah.
And then I volunteered for 2 years and then hated my consulting job and decided to fundraise my own salary to come on staff. And that
Okay.
was 10 years ago. And here I am. They haven't
Wow.
fired me yet. Yeah. We haven't run out of money yet. You never know, but it's nonprofit life is tough, but
Mm,
yeah, but it's been amazing. It's been
that's
amazing.
awesome. Oh,
And
I love it.
yeah, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
And
Please.
I just think there are amazing people doing amazing work in this field from content and programming and work. And Rock is like, can I brag about Rock for a minute and how great
Absolutely.
we are? Okay,
Go for
great.
it.
We're unique in the fact that we do provide clinical care
Mhm.
and faith care. I think
Mhm.
it's hard to find people who do both well
Mhm.
or do both at all. And our net is pretty wide in the people that we serve, which I really love. Of course, not everyone who comes to us has a faith background. There's a lot of spiritual trauma in people who come to us, and a lot of people who are like, nope, not doing that at all.
Mm.
And like, that's okay. We meet people where they're at, and that's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. But the fact that we can provide sound like clinical care at an
Mhm.
affordable rate, everything we do is sliding scale. And
Okay.
we just got accepted to work with our first ever insurance plan, which is a big
Okay.
deal. So like
That's
we're doing a
awesome.
lot to access care for people. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just been really exciting and it definitely is my life's calling and it's exhausting and it's just so wonderful because I mean with proper support people can get better and
Mhm.
it's so much better to be better. It's
Yeah.
just, it's just the joy and the freedom has been such a gift to me and I want to help as many people as I can experience that.
That's awesome. Well, the insurance option, will that be across state lines or just
So we're regional right now. So we're
okay.
DC, Maryland, Virginia
Okay.
for our clinical programs. Our clinical programs, we do individual therapy and then group meals and therapy and then body image and not life skills, but kind of just like process group
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah.
And that's all available for DC, Virginia, Maryland virtually, and then in person here in Arlington, Virginia. And then, but soon with, the counseling compact that's set to hopefully go into effect next year, we'll be able to see people in 30 states.
Okay.
So hopefully
Awesome.
very soon we'll expand our numbers and all the things. And then our faith-based support groups are available to anyone, anywhere, because
Okay.
even if they're informed or led by clinicians, they're not clinical, they're support. So
Yeah.
we're able to see people anywhere virtually with those, which has been
Okay.
amazing. So anyone, anywhere can come to those. We've got some weekly offerings, some monthly prayer groups, and then different 6-week cohorts we run throughout the year.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
And you are getting ready to run a holiday program. What's that like?
We are. So, the holidays, can be shiny and they can be really hard and
Mm.
challenging, especially if you're actively seeking to live differently than the culture tells you about
Mhm.
food and bodies and all the things. And so we have a lasting freedom support group. We partner with our friends at Finding Balance for that to run some of their curriculum. And it's 6 weeks starting on Mondays in November. It's the Monday before Thanksgiving, I think, if I'm
Okay.
thinking correctly. And that idea of that is it's a support group. There's coaching, there's some videos and some content shared, but it's just to have shared accountability and some shared encouragement throughout a pretty what can be isolating and challenging time for people depending on what's going on. So it's a 90-minute group on Mondays that's virtual.
Awesome. So the people that can join these groups, do they need
Yeah.
to have like already, like I know for sure I have an eating disorder, or can they be where you were, where it's like,
Yeah. They can definitely be in that place. I don't know how to put that on like a questionnaire, but like
Are you?
shrug
Yeah, there you
emoji.
go.
I don't know. Whatever we can do for that. Absolutely. Yes. They can be in the shrug emoji space, and that's
Okay.
okay. Yeah. So, and that's the beauty of the support groups too. Sometimes people come who are getting information to help support a loved one too,
Mhm.
or sometimes they might be getting information, quote unquote, to help
Mhm.
support a loved one, because it can be scary to seek help, right?
Yeah,
So people
right.
come at all different levels of comfort and all different places of recovery. Some people it's the first step they've ever taken. Some
Mhm.
people they've had 5 stints in residential,
Mhm.
and it's just whatever. And so the beautiful thing about these groups is I think a lot of people haven't had faith-based support prior to
Mhm.
coming to these groups. And
Yeah.
I like the analogy of like, it feels like people often have all the wiring in place, but they need something to like flip the switch on. Like,
Mhm.
and I feel like these groups, while they're not treatment, and we really recommend that people be seeing a therapist or doing
Mhm.
clinical care outside of the groups, there's something different about hitting the spiritual side, right? And there
Yeah.
is something really beautiful and healing and deep that I
Mhm.
think can be hard to find and hard
Mhm.
again to integrate well with clinical care. And anyone can come from anywhere, and it works because we're not dealing so much with the behaviors. We're talking about
Mhm.
a lot of the underlying stuff and a lot of the
Right.
practical things and accountability.
Right.
So it works. And for our clinical programs, we do screen. We only work with people who need outpatient care because it wouldn't be it wouldn't be helpful if someone needs a higher level of care. We
Sure.
aren't enough for people. A lot of our programs were
Yeah.
built to help bridge a gap. If people are coming home from, an intensive
Mhm.
program and need something to bridge them, and they need more than just a weekly appointment with a therapist or dietitian, it can be hard to find groups. A little less hard since COVID, I will say. We were much more unique before COVID with the group therapy, but
Yeah.
it's a little easier now, but
Yeah.
still, hard to find sliding scale. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
So that's been really good. But we don't screen for the face support group, so you do have a wide variety of people kind of come into us, but we keep it safe, and we have
Mhm.
the rules and things we put in place, and we try to give people follow-up resources as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, in addition to the holiday group, people can get into new ID, like, you run that frequently or
We run it about quarterly-ish, strong
okay,
emphasis on the ish.
ish.
We are a team of a bunch of ladies who keep having babies and keep changing things a little bit. So
Uh-huh. I
some
get
of
it.
that changes with time, right? Like we're a staff
Mhm.
of 4, soon to be 5. We're working on growing the team. So
That's
stay
awesome.
tuned. But yeah, so quarterly-ish is the goal for that.
Okay.
And we do that virtually. And we're also trying to update some materials. So we're hoping to create some more things in the next year or two that people could run on their own, that we could kind of
Mhm.
have more virtual and in-person offerings. And we have some dreams there, so stay
Okay.
stay tuned on that.
Awesome. Awesome. What is one thing as we kind of close up today?
Yeah.
What's one thing you would want the woman who is hearing your story and thinking, "Oh no, this sounds like me. Oh
Mhm.
no, I don't know if I have time to deal with this. I don't know if I want to deal with this. Like, can I just stick my fingers in my ears and go la 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 la?" What
Mm.
would you say to her?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I get it. That sounds nice. And I think we all know, right? Digging our head in the sand doesn't get us any further to who we were created to be or where we want to
Yeah.
be in our lives. And I think that was one thing I had to do a lot of mourning of, no shame, no condemnation, no whatever, because I really think about the redemption that God has brought in my life from
Mhm.
my struggle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hard and things that I mourn and wish could have gone really differently.
Mhm.
And like, gosh, there's been so much redemption. Like
Mhm.
I'm just so grateful for the ways that I have healed, that I feel at peace with my body. I had a baby a year and a half ago, which was difficult for other reasons other than an eating disorder,
Mhm.
but whew, man, that was no joke. But I don't know, just the freedom that I was able to feel. It's a little girl. She's the best. And thinking about
Oh.
how I want to raise her. I know she's so fun. Thinking about how I want to raise her and things. There's just a lot of redemption in the story.
Mhm.
And when I look back to the struggle, I'd like to believe it was this isolated thing, but it
Mhm.
affected but it wasn't, right? Like we're whole people and we show up in our lives as whole people.
Mhm.
And so that eating disorder followed me in every room I went into, whether or not
Yeah.
there was food present, right? Like
Yeah.
it was my posture in relationship, it was my posture in everything. And so that was hard for me to swallow initially, like, because I had a lot of grief with
Mhm.
that. And there was still a lot of grace, a lot of joy, a lot of good in my life, even with the cloud that felt like it was often hanging over me. But I think,
Yeah.
again, better is one day in your courts than a thousand elsewhere.
Mhm.
I mean, I think just doing the next right thing and taking that next step. I love the
Mhm.
Next Right Thing podcast by Emily P. Freeman. I don't
Mhm.
know if you listen to that, but I
Mhm.
love her. And I love that idea of just like do the next right thing. Don't get so caught up in, I have to do it all. I have to do it
Yeah.
perfectly. I have to be whatever. Just like think of a step, make it
Yeah.
attainable, set up accountability, and just do it. And then
Yeah.
do the next one. And if you stumble, that's okay. Do it again. Recovery is a lot of baby steps kind of strung together,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be overnight, doesn't have to be perfect. But I know from experience now, having been at Rock for 10 years, when I'm out of the clinical stuff mostly now, but I sometimes see our numbers or see inquiries. And when someone inquires and then ghosts and then doesn't respond to our emails and never winds up
Mhm.
joining a program, and then they come back a year or 3 or 5 years
Mhm.
later, we're so glad they're back. And it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, I wish we could have worked
Yeah.
with them 3 years ago, right? Like it's never too late. And like today is a great day to take
Love
that
that.
next step, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, tell everyone where they can learn more about rock
Yes,
recovery.
on our website. So www, if you have to say that
Mm,
anymore, I don't know,
mm.
dot rockrecoveryed.org.
Okay.
So rockrecoveryed.org. And then Facebook, we're Rock Recovery ED. Instagram, we're Rock Recovery. And Twitter's not even a thing anymore, right? Whatever it is. X, Twitter,
X, yeah,
Rock
I don't
Recovery.
know. And I don't think it's anyone else.
Yeah,
Maybe if
I
you're on
know.
Twitter,
I
I'm
know.
sorry. Look them up, search
Yeah.
for them.
We're not as active there these
Me
days,
neither.
right? But yeah. But if people are interested in programs, we've got a great free consult. You can sign up for on our
Okay.
website, especially for the clinical programs. We're happy to answer questions. You can send us an email. Um, all that's on our website. And we're just really happy to help however we can. Because I know the journey can be hard, but you're not alone. And we would love to support anybody who needs some help.
I love it. Well, Christy, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Heather. This was great.
Yeah, and thank you for watching or listening today. I hope something today has helped you stop comparing and start living. Bye bye.